Chris McGrew with TTG Equipment, Service Manager at the Logansport, Indiana location. Today we're going to talk about a 2016 S680. What we're going to cover today is just a couple general maintenance items, maybe a couple field settings, some things that maybe we want to keep an eye on before we actually make our way to the field and to make sure we don't run into any problems on our first day out. What we're going to cover will also kind of end up encompassing a larger range of machines as well, but this is particularly going to be more of your 5-speed feeder house Pro Drive transmission machine. All right, and then making our way back from that feed accelerator back here on the left-hand side, we're going to be looking at this main header drive belt configuration. Again, hooking up here where your electromagnetic clutch used to be on like your 70 series machine or your S670s. Again, you got your 5-speed feeder house and you got this big 3-ribbed header drive belt right there. We want to keep an eye on all the components through this because there is a lot of torque being generated from this system. Right down here in the corner, you got this corner idler, which actually ends up being your reel pump as well. These bearings in here, they are greasable, but because of the amount of strain that's on them, we want to be pretty diligent about keeping an eye on those guys and making sure we're popping that belt off at least once a year and kind of spinning that guy over, make sure we don't have any excessive movement there. There's been multiple times where we've had reel pump bearings be out and the customer just doesn't realize it. The only thing, the only symptom he really notices is it's got a healthy growl. But again, with all these hoses and everything else running through here and all the shielding that ends up in this corner, it's a good spot for a lot of chaff and debris to settle up. So if we're getting a hot spot from any sort of noisy bearing or gravelly bearing, we just could be asking for trouble. So we want to be diligent and keep an eye on that. And again, your tensioning system here for your header drive belt, you want to make sure you got that guy properly tensioned. There is a such thing as too much tension, so be sure we're actually going by the tension indicators on the spring assembly there. All right, and coming back from that 5-speed feeder house transmission up here, another maintenance item we want to keep an eye on is this yoke that actually drives that gear case coming from the main engine gear case in the back. We have had an instance where the spanner nut on that yoke can back itself off, and then you get a little bit of excessive movement of that yoke on the shaft. That's going to generate a lot of vibration in that drive line, and if you let it go too long, there's actually a carrier bearing back here in the middle of that drive line. It's got a rubber dampener around it. That thing will end up failing, and then that vibration just slowly makes its way on back to the main engine gear case, and then you start seeing output shaft seal failures, things like that. So again, we just want to come up here before each season, lay our hands on everything, make sure everything feels tight, no excessive movement or anything like that. We're going to grab that drive shaft here on the back side where that dampener in the carrier bearing is, make sure there's no excessive slop developing there. Then next item we want to talk about, located directly below our 5-speed feeder house, is kind of where our main threshing system takes place. This is your concave and your separator grates and basically your rotor housing and your rotor itself. So it's always a good idea every year to make sure we're leveling that concave. The procedure to do that is in your operator's manual. I do suggest that you follow it to the T. A lot of guys come in here and like to throw a tape measure between this transition plate and the actual bottom of the Z-bar and say, oh, well, it's even on the front, it's even on the back. Well, we've seen it multiple times where even after we level it, you look at that Z-bar, the Z-bar physically looks crooked, but if you actually do the leveling procedure and go off the height of the threshing elements compared to the actual concave in here itself, it's truly level. So we want to make sure we're following what the book says. That's going to prevent that material from having to hit a choke point as it comes in through the rotor housing and follows that rotor on up. Another thing we want to keep an eye on as we're looking at this transition plate and the actual Z-bar on your concave system itself. Look at the front of your Z-bar there. You can see on this we got a little bit of paint worn off. That's nothing to fret about. It is double layered there, but what happens is with that crop material moving in there in that clockwise fashion, the front corner of that will start to wear off and kind of get thin. So once that happens, we want to be sure we're replacing that Z-bar as necessary. Also, pre-season checks, we want to make sure we're taking a couple of these separator grates out, throwing this rotor in neutral, and actually rotating that guy around, looking at all those threshing elements up front, make sure we don't have any that are broken, maybe some chunks cracked out of them, or even around the flanges where the bolts hold it onto the rotor housing itself. We want to make sure that there's no cracks developing there. Your separator tines, we want to make sure they're the adequate length that they're required to be. Make sure they're all in place to keep that rotor balanced. Again, if you get that rotor out of balance, you're just going to feel it in the seat, and it's not going to throw that material in the perfect fashion that's meant to. So make sure we're popping a couple of these out for each season, spinning that over, checking all that out, laying our eyes on it. Let's be looking at our separator grates. be looking for any broken or missing teeth. Especially on that right-hand side. On this machine, there's an active tailings elevator over there. Makes it kind of ornery to get in and see everything on that right-hand edge, but try and weasel your way up there as best you can. You lay your eyes on it. We do see a lot of rock damage kind of develop on the right-hand side of these. If you are in that situation where you kind of have to adjust a rock or two, so just be laying our eyes on that. A lot of questions on these spacers that get put in for these separator grates. You'll notice on this S680, the first 3 sections got the spacers put in, but the last section does not. That is because we've actually got that return auger coming out of that active tailings on the right-hand side, dumping all that grain in here, so you cannot have this drop down. So in high capacity situations, high yielding corn like that, we want to make sure we got those bushings put in there. A couple guys have played around with this, different combinations. We found that if you're in a spongy cob situation where maybe you can't get everything threshed off there perfectly, you can go in a stair-step pattern where you'd have this one down, this one up, and this one down. So what that would allow to happen is as that crop material makes its way in here, it would hit that transition and force that cob material back up into the separator fingers there, or back up into the separator tines, and that would go ahead and give it another opportunity to get all those nubbins and that smaller free grain out there on the edge of that cob that maybe was a little bit trickier to get to. So you can do the stair-step pattern. You can have the two front ones dropped and the 2 rear ones left up. In soybeans, we want to be taking those spacers out. I see a lot of guys leaving them in all the time. Well, if you get that situation where maybe you got a smaller beam, maybe like a 4th beam trapped in a pod, and maybe you're not getting it actively threshed up here with the actual concaves and the threshing elements, if you get these sandwiched up just a little bit tighter back here, that just gives you that one final opportunity to get all that remaining free grain out of that trash material down here on this return pan, so that way maybe you can get it actually in the grain tank rather than sailing out the back. We just need to be diligent about laying our eyes on these components down here and making sure we don't have any cracks developing, any sort of wear showing up in the side sheets that could allude to the fact that maybe we got a shoe that's kind of doing more of a side-to-side motion rather than a true fore and aft. So we just want to keep an eye on that. The shaker shaft bearings here, we got 4 cams on each side, and that's actually what decides what's moving at what point. What can happen, we have seen it a couple times, if the shaft key for those cams break, it throws those cams out of time, so then you've got one side going fore and aft, while the other side's maybe the bottom's just going fore and aft and the top is kind of stuck. Again, then you start getting that side-to-side action and it just shakes the whole rear of the machine apart. So we want to be doing a pretty good job of inspecting all these components. These are all things that are covered in your standard combine inspections that we offer at all of our locations. We're very adamant about looking at all those things just because of the amount of damage it can do in a short amount of time. For you guys that maybe haven't ran a final tier 4 machine yet, this is a filter for this after treatment system here located at the rear of the machine. So what this is doing is it's drawing clean air through our engine air filters, filtering it again, and then it's hitting a supercharger located directly behind this bulkhead that is pressurizing the box that all those components are located in. Just keeps the dust off of them. You got the diesel particulate filter in there, diesel oxidation catalyst in there. We want to keep all the dust and debris out of that area, so that way, because they do generate a lot of heat as they're going through their clean burn cycle, and we don't want any hot spots to develop from that. So that filter there, we want to make sure we're doing a good job keeping it clean. I tell guys if they're blowing out their engine air filters, probably a good idea to go ahead and pop that guy out and blow it out as well. If this plugs, it will set a code and it will derate the machine. So that's no fun when that happens. So if you can be proactive and just go ahead and keep that guy clean as possible, you'll be doing yourself a favor. All right, and as we get directly above our threshing system here, you got your unload system drive again on the left-hand side of the machine. This is an 80 heavy chain driving this unload system. This is the 3.8 bushels per second unload system. The easiest way to differentiate the two systems, 3.3 bushels per second will have solid sprockets. 3.8 bushels per second has the slotted sprockets. So this is the high capacity unload, requires the extra heavy chain. Because it is such a high capacity unload system, what they've done is they've encased this lower unload gear case. They got bevel gears in there, and it's actually sitting in an oil bath. That oil bath is filled with cornhead gear case grease. We want to make sure we're doing a good job of making sure that level is staying where it should be, preventing those bevel gears from going through any sort of excessive wear. So there is a drain plug here on the, or I'm sorry, a fill plug here on the side where you top it off and actually put in the required amount. There's no good drain plug. You got to actually remove that entire bottom plate and get all that old grease out of there, and then silicone it, put it back up there, fill it back up with your cornhead gear case grease. If you do a good job of keeping that filled, your unload systems aren't going to fail nearly like they used to with their 70 series machine and our early S series or S680s, so anything that has an exposed bevel gear style lower unload gear case. Cross auger bearings, something else we want to keep an eye on. Pop that chain off with the grain tank empty and go ahead and spin those guys over. A lot of you guys are unloading on the go, so the last thing you want to have is an unload system go down on you in the middle of the season, or at the beginning of the season even, because usually they never fail when the grain tank's empty. It's usually full, so then you get to go through all that. So let's be doing a good job making sure all of our bearings and gear cases and even our auger condition is in good top shape before we get going out there in the field. And again, those are items that are covered in our inspection program. Back here for your drive sprocket, there is a spot here right on the side of this after treatment filter housing for those shear bolts. Let's go ahead and make sure we got all of them that we need. I see too many guys running out of those and then they're just sticking whatever grade bolt they got up there in that drive sprocket. It'll get you going and it'll make it work, but then in the event that it needs to actually shear, it might not, and then you'll end up doing some damage maybe to that 90-degree gear case. Making our way back a little bit further on the left-hand side of the machine still. Again, here's that supercharger coming directly off that air filter for the after treatment system here located in behind me. That is filled with a special type of oil. It's really not a serviceable unit necessarily. We change the oil in it when it's time to actually maybe go through a bearing replacement procedure or something like that. Very little service actually required on that unit at all. Make your way back here a little bit further. We got our discharge drive beater shift kind of located behind this mess of hoses, kind of difficult to see. And we've got this double ribbed belt. Now, if anyone has a early S series machine, going all the way back to 12, these were two individual belts. If you still have two individual belts driving your discharge beater, you need to take both of those guys off and update to this single double ribbed belt. And here's why. What we had early on was a situation where it seems like always one belt was a little bit tighter than the other. In the event you would slug that discharge beater, it could cause one of these belts to come off of the discharge drive pulley, or the actual discharge beater pulley itself, and it'd be dangling off this drive pulley back here directly underneath the chopper jack shaft. So what that would allow to happen is the loose belt would get tangled up and pinched by the other belt that was still tensioned. That thing would sling around and grab the engine harness up here along this left-hand side frame rail. Once it grabbed that harness, it'd just start wadding it up and pulling it off everything. It'd do about $14,000 worth of damage in a very short amount of time. So again, if you're still running the two individual discharge beater drive belts, go ahead and update to this single double rib belt. It's just good insurance. Making our way back here, another item we need to keep an eye on is this 2-speed chopper gear case. There is a detent ball and a spring located inside here that actually holds this T-handle in whatever speed you put it in for slow, out for fast. That spring has been known to kind of wear out a little with a little bit of time. They've got an updated part number that goes in there, a little bit more tension, locks that guy in there a little bit better. One thing you don't want to happen is have that guy in fast and then that spring end up being broke, not able to hold it there, and as you're going through the field it accidentally slides into neutral. Your chopper stops spinning and then it ends up plugging up the whole rear of the machine. So pretty quick and easy to change that guy out, something to be proactive about. I bet you if you got 1,000 separator hours on your machine, you probably need to go ahead and be proactive and do it. I hope you found this video, this 2016 S680 helpful. As always, if you guys have any questions or comments or need further assistance from any of your local dealers, please feel free to reach out to any of us. You can also find us on ttgequipment.com. My name is Chris McGrew. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.